Hey everybody, Pastor Kevin here, and we're going to go through the group curriculum guidance. We are on session number 6 that starts on page 36, and we're going to start the questions on page 39. Let's jump in. Read Luke 11:31. How might Jesus' warning be connected to this episode about the Ethiopian? In that passage on Luke, it is kind of the sign of Jonah. It's the idea of there are these people in the history of Israel who were not Israelites, who did something right or saw the value of the God of Israel. Jonah goes to Nineveh. You'll see these type of comparisons in other places too, Sodom and Gomorrah. But in this case, there is the idea of the queen who comes to Solomon because she came to question his wisdom, and she was amazed. She was without breath, actually, if you go back to the passage where the Queen of Sheba comes. And the point that is being made is that there were people on the outside, people from the edges of society who came, some people that were straight up enemies, and came, and they saw the beauty of whatever it was. In the case of the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South, you're talking about Solomon and the majesty of his kingdom. Basically, it gets rounded out by saying, and someone greater than Solomon is here. You see, so that it's this chastisement of, do you see what you're not even seeing? So it's a powerful, powerful statement. And in this case, it's using the Queen of Sheba, who was an Ethiopian from the land of Cush. She's come a long way. This is the area that is south of Egypt, heading all the way down to probably modern day Khartoum. So you're talking about the Sudan area. But in the Bible, Cush is used as this kind of like you'll see beyond the border of, or the river of Cush. And that's basically saying the ends of the earth that way, right? So the power of this is that someone would come from so far away and see the majesty of one who would call Yahweh God, the God of Israel, would be the one that they worship, and that was Solomon in this case. So it's a use of this imagery of someone who is Ethiopian by descent coming and seeing the beauty, which is very much aligned with our story today, which is the Ethiopian eunuch coming all this way up to the Temple Mount and now leaving, and that's when Philip bounces into him. Question number 2, what is the Ethiopian's role and how might it heighten the impact of this text? Well, much like the Queen of Sheba, it's funny how Scripture is so good and it knows what it's doing. You hear Isaac say this every now and then. Scripture knows what it's doing, and it's super powerful. The Spirit of the living God, it has these ways that there are resonancies, there are frequencies that continue to rumble through Scripture. And one of them here you can see is that, well, we talked about this Queen of Sheba episode, and now there is this one who is a eunuch in the court of the queen, Candace, which is probably, Candace is probably the name of the role of this queen or queen mother or something like that. So he's an important dude. He is within the royal, call it the royal servanthood. He is super powerful in this, and that is why it raises the bar, because you see that there's this one of the qualifications. This guy is from Ethiopia, which is ends of the earth, way down that way. And he's also one of the officials in the court, the royal court of Ethiopia. So he has high status, super high, incredibly powerful. You have to think about this like a chief financial officer in a corporation today has a lot of financial power, but we're talking about like in a monarchy, you have someone who's in control of the keys to the whole treasury. That is a super powerful role, because there's a lot less checks and balances. There's a lot less, there's a huge amount of power that we're talking about here, and that's important for the text. Question number 3, it's important to understand what a eunuch is and how they were treated in the ancient Near East, especially in Judaism. Read Deuteronomy 23:1. Why might this be the case for temple worship and the temple assembly? Discuss in light of other reasons why people would not be able to worship in the temple. There's a few things here. it's clear that I mean, a eunuch is one who's had their male procreative organs removed or damaged or what have you, right? So they have removed any possibility of family, legacy, offspring, and that type of thing. And that was powerful. In the ancient world, the reason why you would do that, I mean, there's a few reasons. One, war, you might castrate your enemy who you've defeated, that type of thing. It's basically to ruin their possibilities of continuing a royal claim or whatever, right? But in the case of someone who's in the court, like a super powerful official, the reason why you might do that is, one, they might be around, say, the queen or the harem of the king, and you don't want any hanky-panky going on. But even beyond that, in a role that's not associated to, say, the queen or the harem, you have someone who you want to be so focused on the role of serving the royal family and trusted in doing so that you remove the possibility of them having other things that would distract them, right? They're not going to be focused on family because their job is everything. They can't create a family. They don't have a family. So there's ancient records of how, eunuchs would be highly trusted because there's not a distraction. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So this idea of a eunuch is huge just in the ancient world. Now, if you take it into the Jewish world, Deuteronomy 23:1 talks about, hey, anyone with their male organs damaged or removed, you're not allowed in the assembly. You're not allowed to come into worship with the rest of the people. So you have an exclusion point that's being made. And this is a permanent thing. You have to think about this. Is not something like, oh, it gets better. This is like, nope. They're held out, and you have to consider this comes down to God's holiness. I don't think we have a hard time understanding and looking back and seeing this, but the point is no one, even unclean, was to come into the assembly. No one. You talk about the sacrifices had to be without blemish, right? There was this necessity and understanding that when you come before the God of creation, that you come clean and ready, and this is one of those things that would eliminate you. So think about that. The Old Testament law is full of different reasons why people could not come into the assembly. Most of them were less permanent than this. This is a permanent exclusion. So we have to think about that in the role of this story. The eunuch has come to Jerusalem to what? To worship. So he's on his way back, and what do you think happened on the Temple Mount? He was excluded. He could go into the temple of the Gentiles. That's probably as far as he can go by the other information that we know. But that's it. That's it. So he traveled this long distance, say from all the way down there, all the way from the ends of the earth down there. He's traveled, and now he's heading back. And that's when Philip, and let's just say Philip and the Spirit are like the ones that are involved in this. So the Spirit is the one who's taking the lead. Let's face it. Philip is just being obedient. But anyway, we'll get there. Question number 4. Read Matthew 19:3-12. Why does Jesus use the example of a eunuch here? Describe his logical steps as best you can. So this is actually a passage on marriage. Jesus is being challenged, and then he's having a discussion with his disciples after. And it's funny that he uses the term, this idea of a eunuch, as one of his explanation of his disciples respond, hey, if all this is true, what you just said with the folks that are challenging, if that's true, maybe it's better for a man not to be married. And Jesus says, well, yeah, maybe, but here, consider these things. Consider the eunuch. And he gives 3 possibilities. Those who are there from birth, those who are made that way, and then those who basically decide it for the kingdom. And you see this hint of, it's like Jesus is showing that, yeah, you are actually more true. It's more true what you're saying than you can think, but it's not like he's clearly holding up marriage, but he's showing that if not having family, it's not something that is absolutely out of the question. And probably because of some of those ancient reasons, right? That literally when you have family, you have distractions. If you go, actually, there's a passage in 1 Corinthians where Paul talks about it. He talks about how, I wish some of you were like me. And the point is that not getting married was actually a bad thing in Judaism. But when Jesus comes on the scene, and the way Paul sees it is like, no, we there's actually something beneficial in singleness, in being a eunuch who does it for the kingdom. But anyway, I just want you to use that there's this imagery of Jesus uses the idea of eunuch in an argument to basically present a case for something, right? In this case, I'd say he's presenting a case saying that marriage is absolutely good, but recognize when you break it, it's a horrible thing. Just think about how he's talking about a eunuch and how it might apply to the story we have today. Question number 5. Acts 8:32 is a passage from Isaiah 53:7, which describe a messianic figure as a servant. How might this resonate with the Ethiopian? So, all you need to do is consider, what does the Ethiopian do? What is his role, right? Super high powered, but he's a servant. And if you think of the language, it might be good for your group to read through the whole servant song, which it starts in the end of 52 and it goes through a good portion of 53, because you have to think about this. A lot of times when a reference to a Bible verse happens in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, the point is there's like this, again, a resonating frequency. So you're like, well, what else is happening in that story, right? So you're going to see the image of the despised one, the one who was not beautiful, who was despised, rejected, right? And he was a suffering servant. And you have to think about this in the role of, yes, this powerful eunuch, right, in the Ethiopian royal court, who has all this power and prestige, who's trusted with so many things, yet in a way he's despised and rejected because he has no offspring. He will have no family. He will have nothing like that. So talk about how these images come together, and there's little things in there, like the verse that's specifically quoted here says, who something about who will know his generation, when it's talking about the suffering servant, about this messianic text about that we would attribute. This is talking about Jesus, right? So it's who would know his generation. You could probably think of offspring or family. It's almost questioning, like, is he gonna have any? And he's cut off. So you're like, no, he's not. But just a little bit forward, a few verses ahead, it says he will see his offspring. So this is the type of thing I want you to be thinking about as you see something like this. It is clear that God has set up this situation, right? You see it in the angel of the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord, that all these things are happening, a desert place and so forth. So when you see a verse like this, it's important to see, what's happening around it. Because in all likelihood, it's probably applicable to what's happening in the story. Question number 6. Read Isaiah 56, 3-5. Consider how close this reference is to the passage that was read. We don't really know what happens next, but if the Ethiopian continued reading, how long would it take for him to read this passage from Isaiah? How might you respond? This is one of the pieces of magic. So we hear that again, you're on a desert. Philip is told to go on a desert road. He meets this guy who's kind of a symbolic desert man. He's like, no, there's no water, there's no fertility, there's nothing. And boop, all of a sudden you see water, right? This is like God is putting together the situation. And then it says he's baptized and he goes away rejoicing. Now, I'm going to suggest to you could take that he's rejoicing because of this thing that just happened. That's great, which is true because he just got rejected in a way at the Temple Mount, and he's on his way home, and then he receives full reception into this faith, right, by the God of Israel, but in the truest sense when you think of Jesus as the Messiah, as the Son of God. Now, if he just reads a little bit further, I don't know how long it takes you to read 3 chapters in your Bible. But if he's rolling this scroll and just continues reading after his baptism, he comes across this text that's talking about a foreigner and a eunuch who will be accepted in. You see, it just confirms exactly what happened in his baptism into this new faith. And now he's taking this faith to the ends of the earth with rejoicing, right? Man, it's a powerful, powerful moment. So think about that. Talk about how that would happen. And there is an application in this. It's just this idea of keeping reading. Keep on reading. Because what happens is the Ethiopian himself recognized that as he kind of searches the scriptures intently, what he discovers is that as he's searching for God, he realized, no, actually God is seeking him, right? how powerful is that? No one's too far away, not even the one from the end of the earth who's dried up and shriveled and cannot provide a legacy for himself. No, 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 no. God will provide a legacy for him. Powerful stuff. Question number 7. What do you observe about Philip and the Spirit in this text? If someone was writing down an episode from your life, what might they say about the interplay between you and the Spirit? There are some simple things here. I want you to find every mention of the Spirit or angel of the Lord, see how they're involved. I want you to look for the tongue-in-cheek, implicit, like, this thing happened, like, all of a sudden. Well, it's kind of crazy that it happened. Like, for example, the fact that the Ethiopian is reading the servant song, the fact that water is all of a sudden available in a desert place. And then I want you to map that against Philip and what Philip is doing. Philip simply is obedient. He says, he's told, hey, just go down to this road, this desert. It's a desert place. Go down there at probably midday, by the way. There's a word in there that's translated south, but I think it could be translated midday because in reality, you already know that they're going south because he's going from Jerusalem down to Gaza, which is southwest. So I just want you to think about Philip is simply being obedient. His participation with the Spirit is simply listening and doing. And we need to take something from that as well. Question number 8. Read Luke 24, 13 through 36 and compare with today's text. What are the similarities between Jesus' resurrection conversation on the road to Emmaus and Philip's conversation with the Ethiopian? There is just some wonder and beauty here, and it comes to another application point, which is when someone is what we see this power of what's happening with the Ethiopian eunuch, but you also see a power that's happened with Philip. Philip is simply in his obedience. All I want you to recognize is he's looking more and more like Jesus, and that's what Luke wants you to see. Compare these stories. Think about what Jesus is asked into to have a meal. Philip is asked to come up onto a chariot. Jesus is asked, hey, he comes across these two guys who don't recognize him. This is post-resurrection. And he says, hey, what are you talking about? And Philip says to the eunuch, hey, what are you reading? There are these elements that keep comparing all the way down to the point where you see that. So you have Jesus who basically explains to these two guys on the road to Emmaus everything from the law and the prophets that they all point to Jesus, right? You have Philip who's describing everything from this point that he hears reading, that the Ethiopian is reading from. He now takes and explains that all goes to the good news about Jesus, right? And then finally, you have the two sacraments happening. Did you notice this? There's a sacrament of Eucharist, or the communion, that's happening, where Jesus breaks bread. After he's invited in, he breaks bread, and all of a sudden, their eyes are open. They realize, oh man, guess who is with us? And he disappears. With Philip goes and dunks, goes into the water, and into the waters of baptism, brings the eunuch out and disappears. He ends up 20 miles away at a city called Azotus, which is the ancient city of Ashdod. Do you see? Luke wants us to recognize that as someone comes to Jesus and is out there proclaiming the good news, we are conformed more and more to the image of the Son through simple obedience. We listen to what the Spirit is telling us. And I will tell you another thing that's in here, and that's that Philip goes from Gaza in the south to Azotus, the central kind of west of Jerusalem, up to Caesarea along the whole coast. And he's just proclaiming the good news. Guess where home is? Caesarea. He's just headed home. He's proclaiming in a simple, obedient way. He proclaims the gospel on his way home. And I think you should take that with you. And that takes us to the carrying the torch section. And the truth is, it's the simplest truth, is that God calls us to a level of obedience. And that obedience seen here is the proclamation of the good news. The fact that Jesus has come, that Satan, sin, and death have been conquered through his life, death, and resurrection. Right? And it's a proclamation. It's news. Our obedience comes out of love for what he has done for us. And now we want people to know, right? And oftentimes I think it's just us being a little bit more dialed in, a little bit more listening to what the Spirit is doing, a little bit more obedient. Not because that obedience saves us, but that is what a Christian looks like. They're reflecting the glory of God into all of creation. They're reflecting his story. They're actually recognizing that they're part of the story. So this week, challenge your people. Talk to them about, is there something that they've been avoiding being obedient on? Maybe they've felt that little bit of a pull in a direction to do something that they know they should have been doing for a while. Just, press people a little bit. Press yourself a little bit. Because as you can see in Philip's life, man, we're seeing this, that as people actually do the things that God calls us to do, we become more and more like Jesus, like this little image of Jesus and Philip kind of having this. Philip is analogous to Jesus. Luke is wanting us to see that. You see how Philip is becoming a little bit more like Jesus. And what does he do? He just proclaims the good news of Jesus, our King, on his way home. And we can do the same. So may your group go well this week. I pray that the Spirit of the living God would enable you to lead well, to be clear. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out. We're here for you.